Hello, all you folks out there in YouTube land. It's been a rather strange week, with Kage more or less refusing to sit down to do the editing, the software wanting assurance that it's been paid for, and Lacey Cameron playing hard to get with the audio for a debunk video she's doing on a rather ridiculous blog post, of all things. The video I had planned, a swipe at the feminist frequency video Damsels in Distress Part 1, had me tearing my hair out in the first few minutes, and as I rather like my hair, I'm going to take the time to do this thing properly. In the meantime, I owe you folks a game review, and I'll try and get that debunk from last week up early next week. By now, you've likely seen the no rhyme or public service announcement, and although it's really not a proper random rant, I just can't bring myself to be angry about everything all the time. In the spirit of really strange things going on for the week, rather than a single game review, I have Don't Starve, and a pile of small educational games that were in a humble flash bundle towards the end of last week. There were a number of games in there, and if you're part of the super hardcore set, then there's not much for you this week, I'm afraid. I'll be putting Don't Starve in last, just to be a bitch. Alright, no, not really. It's more to keep your attention for a few minutes while I prattle on about the other games. I didn't get to play them all, but I did get to play a number of them this week, in addition to the slog through Bioshock Infinite. It may be next week, or if things go the way I'm more than half hoping for, there may be a surprise guest first. A lovely man made a couple of suggestions in the comments of the Skyrim review, and as it happens, I have one of those two games to hand, so that'll be coming up soon as well. As always, if you have a game you want me to try and tackle, there's a link to the appropriate Steam account below, and when I have enough reviews, I'll set up a curatorship for those that want to follow along. The bundle in question was packed full of educational games that Kage asked me to wander through and see if they'd be appropriate for his older son. There were a couple that were, and some that would take a bit more skill than your average 4-year-old possesses, but were still an exercise in glee for the rest of us. A few things before I get to the games themselves. First, the download packages were all comparatively tiny. I downloaded them all in half an hour or so, and took up less than a gigabyte overall. I played the Windows versions of each, although some had Mac and Linux versions if I remember correctly. Some of them were available as DRM-free, and others were Steam only. I'll provide a list in the description. I'm also not going to offer scores this time, as I'll just end up repeating myself. If you like the sorts of games on offer, then these games are all fine examples. If not, then not. The first of the 5 games in question is a quirky thing called Contraption Maker, wherein after a tutorial that some older folks would find insulting, you're set a task, a partial Rube Goldberg machine-style contraption, and a number of bits you can use and abuse to your little heart's content to achieve the goal. It's interesting to me in that there is often more than one way to solve a level, keeping in mind that the simple physics that take up the bulk of the required processing time are intended to be easily grasped by young minds. You may or may not need all the pieces either. Even with all that, it requires the player to reach for simple mechanics, basic optics, and other varied sorts of things to achieve the goal. It also includes a level designer out of the box, and as such you can keep the people around you interested nearly indefinitely. It's a game for kids and casual gamers primarily, and although my personal preference is for RPGs aside a bias against casual games in general, I sank 2 hours into this game in a blink. If someone has a strange addiction to Candy Crush that's costing them a pile of money every month, then do them a favor and get this one for them. They will climb the walls in the skill game, and never get to the money game. It's never offered here, and your ability to think outside the box will get you through nearly any challenge. Next up was a favorite for Kage after I convinced him it wouldn't bite him. Type Rider. This game in an absolute love for the etymological pedant, platformer junkie, writer, and perhaps the odd English teacher. Even the tutorial has a lot going for it, as it's packed with the early history of writing from the Middle East to China. It's really quite charming. There have been a number of this sort of game released in recent memory, but none take quite the approach this one does. There's a bit of room to explore, but you'll have a hard time getting permanently lost. You can also die in this game, which I did rather a lot of. Could do with a bit better jump range, but you can extend it somewhat with double jumps and wall jumping physics. The gameplay itself is fairly staid, but the levels are interesting and the information delivered is utterly fascinating. Those that want to play and not bother with the learning part, the information is in short page book form and can safely be ignored. Not a lot of replay value in this game, however, and with the mechanics being solid but safe, it's fun the first time, perhaps the second. But once you learn all the moves, you can get the achievements easily. Crazy Plant Shop. This is an exercise in time and resource management. If you've ever played any of the Frenzy games, this too be old hat in the gameplay department. Of more interest is the information on the various plants you need to be able to combine to make the customers happy. If you want a time management sim, this is the game for you. If not, there are better ones out there. The Counting Kingdom is hard to categorize. It's not much more than a maths-involved matching game, where you deal with a 4x4 grid, and you have a variety of tools at your disposal, potions to strengthen or weaken the monsters as they march across the field to attack your walls, spells that destroy monsters in a single hit, assuming you've done your maths right, and some fairly short levels, at least at first. It's designed with children in mind under the age of 8, but it's also completely overflowing with cute. Even I blew off more time than the basic gameplay had coming. If you're a mind for some fun you can half think your way through with no major time pressures, then you could do a lot worse. The last game is Influent, and as you might suspect from the title, it's about learning languages. I didn't get a chance to play this one, but when you buy the game, you get a language pack included, and additional packs were less than $5 US. I may come back to this game eventually, but each language pack is 420 words, and thus would be ideal for a youngster to use to get accustomed to something new. I can see this being particularly useful for service members that are moving their families overseas for a period of years. I can see this one exhausting itself fairly quickly, but if you need that little bit to get you started, it could be helpful. Now, at the end, we have Don't Starve, a roguelike thing in which you try and survive as long as you can whilst making things and building up your little empire. You start with just one character to choose from, and you can earn 2 or 3 more with experience points awarded at dawn each day. The world is different every time, and if you get too far afield, don't find enough calories, or can't get a fire built in time, you're going to be eaten by a grue. I have just the base game, but I have heard that the downloadable content adds more nifty things to the mix, and that appears to be relatively inexpensive. There is currently a cooperative version currently in testing that will make things a bit more interesting. Twice the gathering power, and half the resources. Sounds legit to me. It's an interesting game, but this particular sort of game isn't really my cup of tea. It's nice tea, and it's well done, but it couldn't hold my attention for more than 20 minutes or so at a time. It's all the same thing. Find foodstuffs, material for tools, fire, and buildings. Build a fire and hope you survive the night. Rinse and repeat. Once you've been alive a while, you can get upgrades, and that makes it much easier to survive. There is no endgame that I'm aware of, but I can see where you could eventually get powerful enough for your primary problem to be resource overuse rather than getting eaten by grues. That's it for this week. I'm going to get back to work on BioShock Infinite and the first 2 games of the Witcher series. Also, it looks like the thing with the special game is going to go forward, so that'll probably be next week. In between now and then, I need to dig Kage out of his annual depression, and remind him that the videos don't get edited without him. I'm going to let you go now, and thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end of this wandering, scatterbrained, sorry excuse for review. There were ups and downs for all of these, and some were more interesting than others. None were a waste of time, and most of them were excellent for the children in your lives. From all of us, to all of you, let's make games fun again.